If you own anything from 1 to 1,000 properties in the UK, things are changing superbly fast. Adam's going to go into that in a minute and about what some of these changes mean. But first of all, we're going to talk about why everyone is wrong about the UK economy.
So the thing is, all you see all the time in the media is that things are going terribly. They're down the toilet. Rachel Reeves doesn't know what she's doing and all the rest of it. But in reality, the UK economy has exceeded most of the miserable forecasts that people have put on it, all the analysts put on it, before we started this year, growing at over 1%. Yes, unemployment is not in a great place, but what quality of the jobs that we've lost? Are they jobs that need losing? Can we be as productive as possible when unemployment is so low? These are the questions that don't get asked because people just assume that low unemployment must be brilliant and high unemployment is bad. Not necessarily the case. And then ultimately, inflation wasn't helped by what Rachel Reeves did at the last budget. I don't think anybody could deny that. But one-off shocks at between 0.5% and 1% is going to drop out of inflation early next year. We'll be back more towards the target. Base rates will be able to come down a little bit more. And ultimately, with the brakes off the economy, we should get back somewhere near towards that 2% growth we're more than capable of achieving.
Welcome to the Mortar and Margins show. I'm here with Adam Lawrence, a property investor who's built up a portfolio of more than 500 units in the last 15 years, mainly by buying up low value places, adding value to them, using joint ventures to maximize the benefits for all sides. He's also a consultant and advisor to businesses of all sides. Hello, Adam. So you were telling us just now that the UK economy is in much better shape than we think. How can that be? We know that productivity is collapsing. We know that the manufacturing industry has been virtually destroyed in this country. There's almost nothing left. The consumer's been hit by inflation. Energy costs are high. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, we've only just dropped out the top 10 manufacturing countries in the world. So we've seen the worst. And I think the worst has been done because minimum wage affects the manufacturing industry more than anything else. But actually, the recent PMIs have shown manufacturing is nearly back to par. And over the next 12 months, the big manufacturing companies are actually expecting growth. They've seen a big seismic wave of inflation come through, which nobody can blame the entirety of that on the Labour government, aside from anything else. And they're actually positive about the future of manufacturing because remember, in the UK, we get involved in high skill manufacturing, high ticket, high skill. And we should continue to do so over the coming decades, I would think.
And so what you're saying is that you're basically giving a massive thumbs up to Rachel Reeves ahead of the budget. You're saying, yep, Labour, they're doing everything right. We're in a great place. Let's just sit back and watch the dollars roll in.
Duncan, that sounds like a bit of a trap, to be honest with you. I'm not sure about that. But what I'm really saying is ultimately, the UK economy is strong underlying, and politics and the government don't have anywhere near as much influence on the economy as any of either the media or the government would like us to believe. So it's more a case of the economy underlying still doing that British thing, keeping calm and carrying on underneath it all, and not letting what's happened and what's changed grind them down, and hoping that 2026 will be a better year, which I think it will be.
And of course, what does this mean then for interest rates? What are you expecting, Adam, when you're looking ahead to your financing? What are you thinking is going to happen?
Well, this is the perverse thing when you use leverage like I do in my group of businesses. Ultimately, bad macro news often means that rates might come down, which might be a little bit self-serving. But I've asked the Bank of England rep when I was at the meeting recently, and what they said is if unemployment goes up a bit more than their modelling, and their model has only put unemployment up at 5%, we're already there. I think we're more likely to go to sort of 5.5 at some point next year, and that increases the probability of interest rate cuts more quickly, because ultimately part of their job is to stimulate and safeguard the economy, and specifically the unemployment rate, not just inflation. Quite a bit of the inflation is going to drop out, and that's mathematically, it's what we call base effects ultimately. So the shocks that were caused by the employer's national insurance rise, that's going to drop out the figures early next year. We're going to lose between 0.5% and 1% of inflation organically, and that'll take us back to more like the 3% range, where everybody starts getting a lot more comfortable than when we're bumping our head around 4%.
And has that made any tangible changes to the way that you are thinking this forecast? Has it made a difference to your business, or will it?
Inflation for property investors is, we probably benefit more than anybody else apart from the government, depending on how many index-linked bonds they've issued, because we borrow money in nominal values and rents rise with inflation, everything else rises with inflation, but the debt stays fixed. So ultimately, if we've got some capital growth, which again I'm positive about over the coming year and the coming 5 years or so, then we get to outstrip that nominal debt that we've got attached to our assets. And a 3% inflation rate is actually far better for us than a 2% inflation rate. But if it could come back to 2, then ultimately we will see cheaper interest rates again, which we would also benefit from. So it should be a win-win situation, as long as I'm right and we're on the downward slope, Duncan, anyway.
You have a record of being right. I think we can be confident on that. So Adam, I noticed behind you on that pillow is a Sudoku book. Is that what you like doing in the evenings before you go to bed?
Well, I am partial to a bit of Sudoku, actually, but really it's a little Easter egg for our viewers, because this game is all about numbers already. It's been changing immeasurably over the last 10 years, property investment, and it's going through one of the biggest seismic shifts it's ever been through at the moment. The implementation of the Renters' Rights Act is going to change things. All the messaging, whether it's overt or covert, from the government and from every local authority, is go big or go home. And if you aren't on top of your margins, if you aren't on top of your numbers, if you can't solve those puzzles, the days of hobbies like Sudoku, as far as landlording goes, are pretty much over. People are coming to terms with that. And it means that people who've got, 84% of landlords in the UK have still got 1, 2, or 3 properties, right? There's not going to be much room. There's not going to be much regulatory room given for those people to continue being buy-to-let landlords. They're either going to sell up, repurpose, or perhaps they're going to grow their businesses, but they've got to go one way or the other, or the legislation is going to bite them.
So yeah, been hearing a lot about this, the Renters' Rights Act on the TV, on the radio, online. A lot of talk about why this is so overdue, why it's such a good thing, why these rights are much needed. Can you just give us a quick summary, maybe 3 or 4 points that landlords need to take away from this new legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the end of the fixed term tenancy. So supposedly providing much more security for the tenant, because they haven't got to have a 6-month or a 12-month or a 2-year agreement that people will be used to, and all the renewals that sometimes come with it. They move in straight away on a periodic tenancy. But that doesn't necessarily guarantee any level of security at all, because that could be brought to an end by either party at any time. Couple of months notice is all the tenant's going to need to give. 4 months notice for the landlord, and then they can still sell the property. They can still do all those other things underneath in order to regain possession. Few more provisions for rent arrears to rack up bigger bills for landlords. So the primary problem that's informed the legislation is that they've used the source data and taken it at face value. So for many, many years, ever since the Housing Act 1988, landlords have been able to recover possession to their properties without giving a reason. The no-fault eviction, the thing that Angela Rayner told us on day one, we're getting rid of no-fault evictions. Problem with no-fault evictions is that they've been used as the least line of resistance. So 80+% of no-fault evictions, there is fault as far as the landlord sees it, most commonly rent arrears. They haven't followed the more complicated court-driven process to recover possession thanks to rent arrears. They have just served the no-fault notice. And most landlords then, the hobbyist landlords, the Sudoku landlords, they've called it a day. They haven't chased the money. Imagine when large corporates own massive swathes of rental property in the UK, they will pursue debts. It's widely known that the local authorities are some of the most aggressive debt collectors in the country. The big corporates, when they own 10,000 properties, 50,000 properties, 250,000 properties, they're going to have pretty ruthless systems and processes in place. They're not going to have a lot of patience. So the smaller landlord is much more exposed to potentially longer periods of voids apart from anything else, whereas the corporates will just see it as part of doing business, cost of debt. It is what it is. And they're much more likely to leave scars on tenants' credit ratings and things like that. They will be pursuing through the money claim online system, CCJs, all the rest of it. I think this is going to create an entirely new strata of tenancy problems that the local authorities will ultimately be left to clear up. And what will the local authorities do? Because they haven't got enough houses to put people in, ultimately, they'll have to rent them back from the private sector. This is all going to affect the amount of stock there is in the normal functioning private rental sector. And ultimately, one of the first rules of economics, if you're going to reduce that supply and the demand's going to stay the same, then the price is going to go up. So this has all come at a cost to the tenant, but where is that extra benefit going? And the government's own impact analysis on this, they have included so many things in this act that feel and sound right, but the impact analysis shows things like £400 million cost for implementing, and this is solely on the landlord, although economics will see what incidence there is on the tenant in this, of a nationwide landlord scheme so that details are on a central register, for example. Measurable, tangible benefits to anybody, £0. That's what it says in the government impact assessment. Bit scary, really, but then this is how politics works, isn't it? People think that they know what's best for everybody, and you've got everybody in Westminster deciding that's the best thing for the tenant. This is going to help to raise standards. Let's see. I think it's just going to help to drive lots of the 1, 2, and 3 property landlords I've ever met are good people who care about their tenants, who make sure they don't put the rents up any more than they really need to, and try their hardest to keep a good relationship with them. And they usually get paid back for holding those good relationships. This is going to make it much more feudal. We're going backwards 50 or 100 years. We're not going forwards by doing this, but that's what's been decided, and that's what we're going to see. We're going to see this transitional period that I think is going to be really, really bloody for the tenant as the hobbyists sell up, the corporates come in. This period could be 10 years long, it could be 15, 20 years long, but there will be pain throughout as that transitions to look forward to on the 4th of January every year when that letter lands on the doormat and says, your rent's going up by CPI plus 1%, because that's what we do across the board in our portfolio.
So you've painted a very bleak picture there, Adam, of almost of a lose-lose, where lots of small landlords find that this is no longer worth their while. Lots of tenants actually find that they're being pursued more aggressively for what they owe, being chased down for it, where local authorities find that they have to pay more for the housing that they need to supply as part of their obligations. And this seems like a really fundamental change to the British system. Is it bringing us in line more with other countries, or is this us going out on our own?
Well, we have a major problem, a fairly unique situation which was created from back in 1980 when Right to Buy came in and we didn't replace that stock. So a phenomenal wealth transfer from the government, from the state at discounted rates to people who were in social housing. Utterly magnificent for social mobility. The problem was not being able to replicate that in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time. So there was just this one-off generational wealth transfer that happened in the 1980s. Hundreds, several 100,000 between 1981 and 1984 Right to Buy units bought. It was so big, it actually affected what prices transactions were taking place at on average. Because we're talking 10% of the market in any one of those years, as people thought, frankly, this is too good to be true. So we lowered our social housing stock. The social housing waiting lists have been kicking around the sort of 1.2 to 1.4 million for the thick end of the past 15 years. Now, it's not because we're losing so many to Right to Buy anymore. There are only 7,500 units last year sold under the Right to Buy scheme, and 3,750 of those were replaced. Although they were replaced with smaller units, they're selling 3 and 4 bed houses and they're replacing them with 1 and 2 bed flats. But nonetheless, it's a very, very small part of the market. So by doing that, there was a great engine that created exactly what Thatcher wanted to create really in the 1980s. But 40 years on, 20 years on, 40 years on, we were always going to suffer from not doing that. Now you live in a marketplace where in Bristol, there's a 200-year waiting list for a 4-bed social home. And social homes do not have a business case for anyone to build apart from government-funded social housing. Now, Rachel Reeves has done something on this front. You know, she's added about 50% to what we're contributing to social housing every year. But sensible industry reports suggest that rather than the roughly 4 billion that's going in, 3.9, we need to be putting in more like 24 billion a year to make a difference. The average social home will yield about 1% to the government. But why can the Treasury afford it? Because ultimately they're going to see the benefit of people being in affordable housing, having stability, getting jobs and paying tax as they go through the system. At the moment, they don't. They're stuck in housing benefit traps. They're stuck in whatever housing anybody can get for them. They're in temporary accommodation, which often comes in at double or treble the cost of people being housed in the private sector.
So definitely there's a big incentive for the government to fix this. But you say you talk to landlords and people that have maybe got a couple of properties, maybe they do all right out of it. It's an interesting earner for them on the side. What kind of advice are you giving them now, or would you be giving them around these changes?
So effort has gone up. Ultimately, there's always been effort in owning property assets and renting them out, and it should never be taken lightly. Effort here is going to go up. You've got more regulations to cope with. So ultimately, please consider using a letting agent if you don't already. You're going to need to be much, much, much tighter in terms of checks on who you're going to let into your properties, because if you're not, everybody else will be. And there'll be a pool of tenants that are not going to be so desirable that are out there if you aren't really, really careful with that. Make sure there's enough room in there to insure. Rent guarantee insurance, things like that are going to be key. And you make the decision. You don't have to go crazy and buy as many properties as I've bought or whatever, but have a 10-year plus plan. Don't just do this and kind of hang on, right? Are you going to hold them till you're X years old? Are you holding them because you perhaps like one of your children to live in there one day? Are you holding them because you're going to sell when all the corporates are in and start paying strong money for stuff because they can't get units and they're making good margins, right? Is that the time to sell? Do you want to plan towards an exit at that stage? So always depends on what the person specifically wants to do, but they've really got to be much more up for it. It's not a passive sort of sit back and, like we're saying, not a hobby anymore, I'm afraid.
Okay. Thanks very much, Adam. That's been really useful. I think, for me, and for our audience, I hope as well. Let's just end. We're going to talk about a person of the week, and it's quite a good coincidence because he is one of the people that were instrumental in starting off this process, I think, for the reform of the rental market. And it's this fellow behind me, George Osborne. He left government, and unlike many people who had senior jobs in government, he didn't sort of quietly sneak into a consultancy role. He's had a couple of big jobs running the Evening Standard. He was leading the British Museum, actually, on their board. He's now being talked of as possibly a chairman of HSBC, Director General of the BBC. So we're going to probably be hearing more of him. He brought in austerity. He's probably best known for that, but pursued what he saw as, I think, very economic, business-friendly policies. Hero or villain, Adam?
Well, himself and David Cameron, not massively dissimilar to Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, really, in terms of their orientation when you think about it. And one of the things that they share is that big business will do a better job. So I think that part of George's vision, and don't get me wrong, in the landlording community in general, he is derided as one of the great villains of all time, because he did, as you correctly say, kick off this process of what's become a hostile environment for landlords, borrowing the Theresa May phrase there. 2015 changed the taxation around owning properties in your personal name, pushing the whole market, the very start of the tip, away from the corporate, towards the corporate and away from individual ownership. But what he also did do, and this should never be missed, is ultimately the private rental sector had absolutely grown intergalactically between 2002 and 2015. It had gone from 2.2 million units to 5.5 million units in the UK in just 13 years. Funded, now that wasn't just fueled by the debt before 2008. Of course, this carried on 2009, 2010, because, as us economists would say, people were making supernormal profits out of rental property at that stage. And it did start to crowd out first-time buyers. So George, and then the subsequent policies that followed, some of those were regulatory from the Bank of England. This has continued with the change in the Renters' Rights Act that we were talking about. That private rental sector has stayed very flat since then. There's still about 5.5 million units today. In fact, I personally believe there's fewer than that, but these are counted in the English Housing Survey about 18 months laggardly. So we'll find out when we see the figures next year. But that has meant that first-time buyers have had more room to come back into the market. And there has been significant repair to the first-time buyer action. First-time buyers have carried this housing market 2023, 2024, because they're highly motivated. They want to get in. And if landlords are out, is it a terrible thing that first-time buyers are coming in and buying those properties? Of course it's not. I don't think anyone can really say that it is. A good first-time buyer market is a functional part of the building blocks of the economy. What we've got at the moment is this very strange dichotomous property market where people are worried about expensive houses, what new mansion tax is around the corner and all the rest of it, all fearing the budget. But first-time buyers and people in properties ultimately that don't have those nice to have problems of perhaps being in band G for council tax or whatever, they're moving quite happily at a rate of knots, to be honest with you, into properties that are affordable. Their wages have drastically outpaced what's happened to property values in the past few years. There was starting to look a bit bubbly before Liz Truss came in. Not that she deflated that bubble deliberately, but there we go. I'm sure she'll be on the wall one week, Duncan, relatively soon. But back to George, he actually did quite a bit for first-time buyers and the economy overall, even though the landlord community will never, ever forgive him. And obviously a very capable individual, because of his very illustrious CV that you've just referred to.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. Really, really good talking to you. We will be back next week with some more numbers, some more guidance, some more advice, and some more topics for landlords need to know. Really good to talk to you. This has been Mortar and Margins. We will see you later. Thank you.
Thank you.